Hello, copywriters. It's Belinda Weaver here from Copyright Matters, and this is a little free training session on how to make boring topics more interesting. Not just more interesting, but binge-worthy interesting, right? So if you are watching this live, I would love to know that you're here. Say g'day, let me know where you're tuning in from, or just that you're ready. And if you're watching the replay, drop me a hashtag replay. And of course, if you have questions as we go, pop them in the comments and I will be coming back. So today's training session has come from a poll that I ran in For the Love of Copywriting last month. And I threw out a few ideas about topics that I could run training sessions on. And this one was a clear winner. So today I'm going to break up this training session into how to make boring topics more interesting. And this is particularly relevant for blog writers when we have to come up with lots of interesting ideas around an industry or a product or a service. And the other side is how to actually make our writing more interesting, because that's definitely something that we have to tackle as copywriters, and we have to tackle when we're writing our own copy as well. Hands up if you've read your own copy and gone, oh my God, this. Or you've had a client say, I need it to pop a little more. Well, in the second half of today's training, I'm going to tell you what that pop is and how to bring it into your copy. But we're going to start off by talking about finding interesting angles, ideas, takes, etc. on boring topics. So remember, if you're watching me live, say g'day. If you're watching the replay, use hashtag replay. Now, I have an interesting experience with this because I used to have blog writing services, and people would hire me on retainer or buy packages of blogs for their service. And sometimes this came from the point of view of going, I know I need to boost the amount of content on my website in order for it to have a little more visibility in Google, right? More content means there are more signals and flags for Google to identify what this website is all about, or this particular page, so we can match up the content with searches, right? So I would often have companies coming to me saying, I need 12 months worth of blogs, or we're going to get your 4-pack or your 6-pack or your 8-pack of blogs, and we're going to kind of do a 6 months content strategy. And they weren't always that interesting. 2 examples that really stand out. And firstly, hi Melanie. 2 examples that really stand out where I did almost a year's worth of blogs for an electrician who installed TV antennas. So that's regular blogs in and around TV antenna installation, right? The second one was for a lady who picked up dog poo. Yes, it's actually a thing. And she wanted to fill her website with really relevant, valuable, interesting content, right? Not just from an SEO point of view, but to really position herself as a subject matter expert, because that's the gift of a blog. For copywriters, your blog works as your portfolio as well. But for every other business, your blog shows off your expertise, positions you as a subject matter expert, shows that you got things to say about your topic, right? Your specialist topic. So that's what she wanted for her blog. Now, talking about dog poo, you wouldn't think that there's a lot to say. And there isn't. Now, of course, what I had to do was come up with lots of different and interesting ways to talk about what she did. So it's not just about the product or the service. It's about the industry as a whole. And for this particular one, it was basically how she helped people, because, you know, people who can't bend down, heavily pregnant women, older people, busy people, right? It's actually a brilliant service, but it's really easy to run out of puff when you have to come up with a lot of ideas about stuff. So that's what today's training is going to cover. And so the first thing I would love to know is, what's the most boring thing you've ever written about? Drop that in the comments, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the replay. What is the most tedious thing you've ever had to write about? And see if it competes with my TV antenna installation or dog poo. So some of the ways that you can make up more interesting angles and ideas for, it might be boring topics, dry topics, or topics you've just got to come up with a lot of ideas for, is know the audience really, really well. Like, this is the foundation of all copywriting. But of course, if you have to come up with a lot of ideas, it helps, really helps, if you know your audience really, really well. When you understand, I say, you understand what their pain points are and what their frustrations are, but not just at a surface level, deeply understand. And you know all of them, not just the top one, but you know all of them. So knowledge about your customer and your reader, who you're writing to, is absolutely paramount. And when you know them really well, you can actually reel off a lot of topics related to their pains, their frustrations, their dreams, their aspirations, their situations. I just want to have a look at some of these topics coming in. Stephanie wrote about milk. Haha, okay. Melanie wrote about dry wool patching and repair. Yep. Sarah says hi. Hi, Sarah. And so, a lot of topics might be more in line with like financial services. I have written about financial services and plumbing a lot. And these kinds of things, sometimes it starts off really interesting, but you got to keep the creativity popping. And so the first idea is to really get in and understand who you're actually writing to, because their problems, their frustrations, their light annoyances, their life situations, their dreams, their aspirations will give you lots of context and fodder and little sparky connection points to write from. It's really, really important if you have to come up with a lot of ideas. Now, the other part of that is where they are in their stages of awareness. So it's not just kind of their general life problems, but where are they in their stages of awareness? And now, if you've not heard about the stages of awareness before, there are 5. Someone goes from being completely unaware that they have a problem, to being aware that they have a problem, to being aware that there are solutions that exist, to being aware that there are specific products, then to being most aware and ready to buy. And at each stage of that development, as people move through those stages, they need different information, right? So that's not just knowing what their pains are, but where they are, what they need to know in order to move to the next stage. And this is perfect for your copy. Your copy really needs to reflect this. But it really pulls in to that idea of being relevant and value and having a high connection point to someone reading who was like, this is exactly what I needed to read right now. That's your goal, right? That's always your goal with your copy and your content. And so the next way that you can make some topics a little bit more interesting, apart from being highly relevant and targeted to the reader, is make an unexpected comparison. So that's tip number 2. Make an unexpected comparison. Why this is like that. Hopefully, like that weird thing, that unexpected thing. That's what gets people's eyeballs and draws people in. And I've done that quite a bit on my blog. A fairly recent post that I did was like why copywriting is, or like lessons of copywriting from Roald Dahl, right? And so basically I've been reading Roald Dahl to my kids, and my brain, I call these blogging goggles, right? My brain is always looking at my life going, you could write a blog about that, right? And so that's the thing. Why this thing is like that unexpected thing. That's a way that you can create an interesting hook. And it's also a really interesting way to bring in kind of pop culture references. Copy Blogger have always done this. really well, where if you get the pop culture reference in the headline, you're kind of in the cool club. And if you don't, it's still a bloody good read. But so that's tip number 2. Create an unexpected comparison. Why this is like this unexpected weird thing. Right. So tip number 3 is to bring in a celebrity or an authority figure of some description. Now, it doesn't need to be a Kardashian or someone like that unless it's relevant to the product or service, but someone who is considered an expert in the industry that you are writing about, bringing them into the narrative can create an expert positioning context, which is automatically more interesting, right? So I don't want wealth building tips from, my mum. My mum's awesome, but I want wealth building tips by someone who is really freaking rich. And I'm also not talking about necessarily having to interview them, but there are so many pieces of content where you can take lessons from Bill Gates or, Warren Beatty, financial investment lessons from Warren Beatty, something like that, right? And so having this expert position of authority in the main dynamic of your content makes it more interesting than just 10 financial tips to grow your wealth, right? And that's what we're talking about, how to make relatively uninteresting topics more interesting. So we've got really know your audience, and to make the content hyper-targeted. Number 2, use an unexpected comparison. Number 3, use a celebrity or an authority figure. Melanie has said David Hasselhoff, maybe? Yes, it's a Knight Rider, David Hasselhoff kind of day. Things are tense here in the US, and I needed a little bit of Hasselhoff to make me feel good. Thank you, Melanie. So, number 3 is to add a time frame to turn like a generic teaching topic into actionable implementation. So, I did a blog post about social media tips, right? But to make it more interesting, I was like, how to nail your social media in 5 minutes per day. So adding that time frame and action steps, or 3 steps to make this amazing thing happen, right? So when you add a time frame or a limited number of steps, it makes it more doable, more actionable, and it's not just kind of generic lessons that you might read anywhere. So that is the next tip I have for you. How many I got? 1, 2, 3, 4. That is tip number 4. Now, the 5th tip I have for you is to share a personal story. And this is really important if you write your own blog, rather than it being like a huge brand bit of content. If you are writing your own blog, and the blog is coming from you as the face of your business, whether you're a copywriter or not, weaving personal stories into your content instantly makes them more interesting, because we connect more strongly with that person-to-person story element. Tell stories in your marketing. It's something we hear all the time, and to be honest, I find the idea a bit intimidating sometimes. But when I open a blog with something that happened to me, like the Roald Dahl one is an example, I opened the post talking about how I was reading these stories to my kids, and that was the context from which I bounced the lessons and the observations and the education, right? But it instantly made it more interesting because people could see that behind the scenes, behind my, global facade, I'm a mum reading stories to her kids. And that is a really strong identifier for people and me, right? So that's what you're looking for, these sparks of connection. When you offer people sparks of connection, and it might be relevance to them, it might be a position of authority, it might be a quick hack for implementation, it might be a story. Those sparks of connection are very powerful and can really shortcut the trust factor, but it instantly makes your content more interesting as well. So the last one I have, tip number 6, is newsjacking, right? There is so much potential for newsjacking right now. And if you don't know the term newsjacking, it's basically where you take something that's happening right now and you make that the context framework for your content. Now, there's political stuff happening, there's pandemic stuff happening, there's lockdown stuff happening, there's a little too much happening right now. And you will go to any basically news or business, go to any business website, Business Insider, Forbes, all those kind of places. You will see marketing tips in the pandemic, all those kind of things. You'll see that newsjacking, what we can learn about efficient business processes by watching the US election. That's newsjacking. Now, the downside of newsjacking is it does make your topic date. It dates your content. So you can't then put that content in your social media feed and do it every couple of months because it's related to a specific news point and it dates the content. So it makes it more interesting in the moment, but it's not evergreen. Sarah commented, most tedious, currently working on a boring tin can. For a boring tin can, add copy and writing copy. Also written about superglue. And you know what? We shouldn't be so unkind about these products. They might not be so interesting. They still need content. They still need copy. They still need help. But these are ways, and this is especially for blog content, that you can make topics more interesting. And generally, if I'm brainstorming blog ideas, and this is a kind of separate, I could do a whole separate training on this, I like to set a timer and come up with as many different problems as possible. But what I do tend to start with as my first pass of brainstorming is the problems of the audience that need solving, where they are in their stages of awareness, and so the problems in each stage of awareness, what information they know, what information they need to know in order to progress. Because when you're creating content that solves problems, that is highly relevant, highly targeted, and that's a really great place to go. All right, so let me know if you have any questions about what I've talked about so far. But what I'm going to move on to is how to actually make your writing more interesting. So this is when you've written something and you're like, I just don't think this is very interesting. And sometimes we have our clients say, it's good, but can we make it pop a little? And sometimes as a freelancer, we're like, I don't know what that means. And, we need to be clearer. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to take the feedback from our clients and figure it out. Sometimes that feedback is not incredibly helpful. And so as copywriters, we need to be able to bounce off that and turn something vague into something much more specific. But lucky for you, I'm going to give you some ways to make it pop. Because pop means energy and impact, just like the word pop, right? And so one of the things that you can do to give your copywriting more energy and enthusiasm is change the rhythm. Because when we're talking, what we do is we have really long, certainly what I do is I have really long sentences and I talk really fast and then I stop. And that's what we can do in our words. We can have medium length sentences and then a short one, a one-word paragraph, and a long sentence. Because when we're doing that long, medium, short, medium, short, we're adding rhythm and energy into the copy. So if you feel like your copy is a little bit boring, the first thing to do is have a look at the sentence lengths. Because if they are the same length, then everything sounds the same. You're creating a rhythm that's quite frankly boring, right? And that's how people begin to read it. So if all the sentences are exactly the same length, it's boring. It doesn't matter if the content's interesting, it's boring to read. And the other thing is to be conversational, not pompous, not too much jargon, because that's another thing. We all like to be told that we're clever little people, but if someone has to think about reading as they're reading, they're getting closer to going, oh, I'm going to read something else. And that doesn't mean we have to dumb ideas down. Being straightforward and being clear is just making the reading experience impossible to mess up, right? You want it to be smooth, no bumps. And as soon as someone kind of gets a word they don't recognize, or it's written in this really kind of complicated way, or it's jargon, all that kind of stuff, people have to go, bump, oh, hang on, what's this? And they have to think about it. And if they have to think about it too much, there's this little bubble of shame. And they're like, I'm going to read something else. Now, if you're using language that is completely appropriate to your audience's education level and the topic and the industry, you use that jargon because it's appropriate. But if it's fluff and bubbles and $10 words that are just there to sound inflated and clever, then it's just hot air, right? That's pompous. So we want the copy to feel like a conversation because it makes it easy to read. And we want to make sure it's straightforward in terms of explanation so that reading process is nice and smooth. Because I love reading with no bumps. You know that process where the words, it feels like it's just getting downloaded into my brain because I'm not thinking about reading at all. I'm just there in the story. I absolutely love that. And that's what makes our copy more consumable. So the next tip I have for you is to make your copy more interesting is vivid and visual language. So we've talked about the rhythm, the lengths of the sentences, and also the vocabulary that you're using. But you can also add color and emotion and descriptions, as long as you don't go overboard, to make the copy pop out, make it more vivid, give me a stronger reaction to the words, right? And that's when you can use metaphors and comparisons, but also just power up those words, right? It's one thing I teach in the copywriting masterclass is when you're looking at headlines, you take bland, boring words and you power them up to make them more interesting. And sometimes a little more scandalous, and we don't necessarily want to do that because that's clickbait, but we're talking about using vivid and visual and emotional language to draw people in, to make the reading your copy and content like a full body experience, right? And then the last one I wanted to leave you with is relatable storytelling. And it's one of the tips I gave you in making your topics more interesting, is just incorporating some humanity into it. Weaving stories in, telling examples, and they might not be your stories, they might be client stories, but just bringing that humanity and personable element into your copywriting will also make it stickier and more interesting to read. So I'm just going to quickly check the comments. What we got here? Cool. Let me know what you think. How are those ideas sitting? Are any of them new? Let me know any standout ones that you like. I am definitely using that next time I have to do some brainstorming or next time I'm reviewing my copy. And while I'm waiting for your replies to come in, I will do a quick recap. So, what we talked about, training in 2 parts. We talked about how to brainstorm more interesting angles or ideas on boring topics. And the first one, the big one, is just be super, super relevant. Understand your audience, what problems they have, but go deep. Problems at each stage of awareness they have. Help them move forward. Really understand what they're trying to get away from and what they're trying to get towards. That will instantly, as soon as you make it more hyper relevant, it will instantly be more interesting. Make unexpected comparisons. Bring in a celebrity or an expert to give the content some really high value context. Add a time limit or a limited number of steps to turn kind of generic teaching content into actionable implementation. Incorporate personal stories and newsjacking. And then we talked about how to make your copy more interesting to read. And I talked about varying the sentence lengths, being conversational rather than pompous or bland, using visual, vivid, emotional language. So choose your words carefully, and also incorporating some relatable storytelling. So lots of tips there, but you know what? If nothing else, be relevant, be hyper targeted, know your reader, understand where they're coming from, and write to them, and it will land in the way that you want it to. So your action for today, if you're watching the replays, tell me the most boring thing you've ever written about. Tell me your big takeaway from today. What really landed with you? What are you going to implement? And that's what I would love to hear from you. Annie, hi Annie, has just said unexpected comparison, authority figure, and time frame. Yes, awesome. All the things. I love it. And this is basically how I've approached lots of writing, because not every project we take on as copywriters is the most fascinating thing in the world. Even boring businesses need awesome copy. And when you can add a little bit of spicy sauce to it with your creativity, you make yourself a valuable resource as a copywriter, and you also make the content so much more interesting. So that's what I've got for you today. I hope you've enjoyed this free training session, and I will see you later. Of course, you know where I am. I'm on Facebook all the time. Copyright Matters on Facebook, the free Facebook for the love of copy. My name is Belinda Weaver, and I hope you have a fantastic, fantastic day.